What's up, Carl Tube? Carl Main coming at you, all you Carl Maniacs out there. Here live, Carl Main Studios. Got the sewer thing with me. And we're going to do some stuff today. I want to talk to you about buffers. So on the breadboard, I'll slide it over here. Yeah, you can see the breadboard right there, right? So on the breadboard, we have an LF356N Tiger Buffer. So this is the stock buffer from Tiger. No values changed. The chip is the same. All of the capacitor values are the same. And I want to show you how swapping the chip and the input resistor does or doesn't, you be the judge, change the sound. But the first thing that we want to hear is the stock tone of the buffer. So this is the stock buffer. I'm actually going to play unbuffered first so you can hear what that sounds like, and then I'm going to play buffered. So here we go. So this is unbuffered. And now with the buffer activated. Okay, so now we're going to start swapping chips around. So the first chip that we're going to swap out is we're going to swap out the LF356N, which is a fine chip. It works great, but it is 45 years old, and there might be newer designs that work better, that are inexpensive. So they might both give us more of what we want in terms of the engineering of the circuit and deliver us a cost savings if we're building them at scale. So we're going to try, instead of the LF356N, we're going to try one of the workhorse op amps of all small signal audio design, the TL071. The TL071 is basically free. You can dig around in junked electronics and find them. They're everywhere. They have low DC offset. They work as well in Antarctica as they do in the Sahara Desert. They are, durable, reliable, low noise, really good audio op amps. And they're dirt cheap, right? Practically free. You can dig them out of stuff that is inoperable and find, harvest 5, 10 working TL071s. You can go to the Goodwill and find, shit that doesn't work, buy it, and just harvest the parts out of it. So I'm going to take a second here. I'm going to swap the chip, and then we'll be back with the TL071. And you can be the judge of whether or not it sounds different. I would say listen for differences in the high end, and also listen for differences in the overall volume. Okay, we've got the TL071 in. Sorry, I have to use my handy-dandy Streamlight wedge here because the writing on the ICs is tiny and it's hard to figure out what's what. But we've got the TL071 in. Let's hear how it sounds. Okay, so that's the TL071, and for those of you who are like, I don't remember what the 356 sounded like, I'm going to timestamp all of this shit so that you can just go through in the video on the YouTubes and click on LF356N, and it'll take you to that, and then you can click on TL071, and it'll take you to that, and then you can click on this next one we're going to do, OPA134, and it'll take you to that. So don't ever say that Papa Carl doesn't love you, okay? Anyways, the next chip we're going to do is the new hotness in audio op amps. It is the OPA134. This is designed for things like really high-end solid-state audio receivers. So if you have some sort of fancy Cambridge audio solid-state receiver, something like that, it might have an OPA134 or similar chips inside of it. The downside of the OPA134 is because it is the new hotness, it is about 6 times as expensive as the LF356N, which is itself functionally infinitely more expensive than the TL071, which, as we discussed, is free. So here I'm going to plug in one of these OPA134s, and we're going to see if it sounds markedly different, if it sounds any better, if there is less noise, if there is more sparkly high end, what the volume is like, whatever. Now, I do believe it is going to be a little bit quieter because I don't believe that the OPA134 is unity gain. I think it is -1 volts or -1 dB, something like that. I don't know. I've been reading these spec sheets and vaping, and it's hard. Anyways, I'll be back with the OPA134 here in just a second. Sorry, clearly the breadboard has some grounding issues, but we're going to get that resolved here in a second. We've got the OPA134 in. Here we go. Let's rock. Try again, Carl. Okay, so that's the OPA134. Now, I do want to know what other people think about this because this is totally subjective. To my ears, they don't really sound different. The OPA134, the TL071, the LF356, and I can't tell a difference. And because I can't tell a difference, for my purposes, I think the TL071 is the chip to go with because you can harvest them out of things if you want. If you want to buy them, you can buy a shitload of them for like $1. They're never ever going to stop making them. They're used in like everything. I don't think it's worth it to spend $3 and change on a single chip for one of these buffers, even if it is really fancy. I don't hear any difference. Now, what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to the TL071. I'm going to play it so you can hear that. And then we're going to swap out the input resistor. Because what's happening with the input resistor, there's an input capacitor and an input resistor, and the resistor goes to ground. And what happens when a capacitor and a resistor are in a circuit in such an arrangement, wired in series with the resistor going to ground, is it forms an RC network. Now you can swap the components in the arrangement and they'll also form an RC network. But what changes is the nature of the RC network. Now those of you who are familiar with audio signals know an RC network as a filter. It is a pass filter, okay? And when you are arranging the components in such a way that the resistor comes first and the capacitor goes to ground, that forms a low-pass filter. When you arrange it in such a way that the capacitor comes first and the resistor flows to ground, and actually I think the sequence doesn't really matter here. What matters is which component is grounded and which component is inline. When you reverse that arrangement, you get a high-pass filter. Okay, and by varying the values of the components in the RC network, you can vary the cutoff point of those filters. So now we use the input cap and the input resistor for functions other than forming a filter network. It is sort of by happenstance, by virtue or incident of having to use those components in a particular way in the circuit to do things like pop filtering, DC leakage filtering. In order to utilize those components the way we need to in the circuit, they create a high-pass filter. So, because we have a high-pass filter, remember a high-pass filter is also a low-cut filter, we can tailor those values so that we're getting the effect that we want, meaning the outcome of the desired outcome of placing those components in the circuit, and we can also make sure that the filter that's created isn't meaningfully interfering with our audio signal in the audible frequency domain. So just a reminder for those of you who have ears, humans can generally speaking hear from about 20 hertz up to about 20,000 hertz or 20K hertz, right, kilohertz. We lose a lot of that high-end hearing as we age, but what's important here is the low value, because remember, we're looking at a low-cut filter. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that the components that we select, if we're looking to be maximally transparent in our audio signal, we want to make sure that the components that we select result in a high-pass filter where the cutoff value is low enough that it's not impacting anything in the audible domain. In other words, we want the cutoff frequency to be below 20 hertz. So right now, and there are lots of, you can get on DigiKey if you want, or you can get on, I mean, you can probably put it into Google and it'll tell you. You can use a formula to calculate the cutoff frequency of your filter network given the value of your resistor and capacitor. That formula is, as a matter of fact, 1 over 2 pi RC. So you got to get your units right. You want to make sure that your resistor and your capacitor are expressing in the correct unit measurements. microfarads, picofarads, on and on and on. And you need to make sure of that because if you get it wrong, then it scales exponentially, right? So what was previously, let's say you swap a 100K for a 10K component by accident. What was previously a cutoff at 72 hertz is now a cutoff at 7 hertz or vice versa. I kind of forget which way the values work, but you get the point. It's really important to get these scalars correct, which is why I advise using a calculator like DigiKeys, because you can set the values and it'll tell you exactly in hertz where your cutoff point is going to be. All of this is to say, in the original Tiger schematic, at least the Tiger schematic that I have access to, it might be wrong. Waldo might get on here and tell me that I'm an idiot, in which case I reserve the right fully to be an idiot in Waldo's presence. That guy knows everything. But in the schematic that I have, the input resistor coming off of the input jack is 100K. So that's what's in here right now. When we look at the rosebud buffer, we see that that value is not, in fact, 100K, but 1 meg. Holding all of those other components the same, the effective switch from 100K to 1 meg should be that the cutoff frequency of that high-pass filter goes from 70 hertz, around 70 hertz, down to 7 hertz, around 7 hertz. This all happens before the signal is buffered. So what's being buffered in the output, the voltage that's being followed in the output, is a result of this sequence of capacitor and resistor, this filter that's being applied to it. So for Jerry, it didn't matter much because anything under 80 hertz is functionally getting scooped out anyways. You look at his amp settings and you see he has the bass knob cranked all the way down. That's just kind of the way he liked it. For us, if we're thinking about what a buffer does and how we build a unity gain buffer that is going to be as transparent as possible, it's to our advantage to design that input RC network so that the cutoff point is inaudible. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to perform exactly that swap. So we're going to start with the 356, or excuse me, the TL071 chip in there because as we discussed, I don't think it makes any difference. And we're going to swap out this input resistor because I do think this makes a difference and I think you'll hear it. So here we go. We're going to swap from 100K to 1 meg. We're going to make the resistor value bigger and we're going to see what happens. What effectively should happen is we should get more bass in the signal, although there's very little bass in the signal to speak of anyways. So maybe you'll hear it, maybe you won't. It's more transparent mathematically speaking. So you be the judge. Sorry, forgot to add. I'm going to play the TL071 with the stock resistor value, and then I'm going to swap the resistor value. Here we go. This is the TL071 with the stock value. Okay, and now we're going to swap that resistor value out for 1 meg, and you're going to hear how it sounds. Tell you what, that ground buzz is really a pain in the ass, isn't it? Okay, we've got the values swapped. Let's hear it. So one of the things you're going to hear is it is, in terms of the high end, a little bit quieter, right? Because while it is a unity gain overall, because we're doing different stuff with the signal before it hits the op-amp, the audible effect of the amplification, even at unity gain, is going to be a little bit different. So because we have 70 more hertz of audio signal in there to contend with, it flattens everything out a little bit, right? And this is mostly like sort of how your ear and your brain process frequencies in comparison to one another. It sounds a little bit quieter. This is likely why those later EMG designed boosts, the JG1 and the JG2, were just a little bit hotter than unity gain, like 2 or 3 decibels hotter than unity gain, because the perceived effect is effectively going to be unity gain. It's not going to, really push the front of the amp any harder. It's just kind of like lifting everything up a little bit, because it sounds a little flatter. At least it does to me. I would like to hear what you all think of it. But for me, I like the effect of using the lower value, the 100K value, or in fact, I saw a different schematic, not for a Jerry buffer, but for a buffer made by a guy named Jack Orman, that's very popular on the internet. Just a simple IC buffer, which is almost identical to this circuit. It's more stripped down, but the biasing of it, the power section, the input section, is identical with the exception of the input resistor value, which is, I think, a 2K2. And so again, by dropping that value, the perceived effect is that there's more high end in the output signal because you're carving more out of the low end of the input signal before you shove it into the op-amp. So what have we learned? Maybe not much of anything. I think we've learned that if you're going to build buffers at scale, you can probably save some money on chips by using TL071s. And I think we've learned that if you want to monkey with the sound of the buffer, that really that input resistor is the place to do it. I should mention there are 4 other resistors, 5 if you count the current limiting resistor for your LED. You shouldn't count it. It doesn't do anything to the sound. But 2 of these resistors in the circuit are DC biasing. They're as effectively serving as a voltage divider, so that the input voltage is biased correctly for the op-amp. So they're not doing anything to the sound. And in every circuit I've seen, the Tiger buffers, the Rosebud buffers, the Orman Beavis buffer, they're the same values. It's 2 1 meg values in series running to ground. So I see no reason to change those. That seems to make a lot of sense to me. After the IC, there is a resistor running into an output cap. The R5 resistor, which is what that resistor is 100 ohms, which you're using to balance the output level of the signal before it goes into other stuff. You have an output cap, which again, you have a DC component, the op-amp. So when you're following up the op-amp in the signal, you use a you use a capacitor there to prevent DC leakage. Most schematics I've seen for buffers of this type, some use a polarized capacitor, some do not. What I can tell you is that the Jerry buffers, the Waldo Spud buffers, which are built using new old stock components, to the specs of Jerry's stuff, they were not using polarized capacitors. They were using film capacitors. Because of the DC levels and the voltage levels that we're dealing with, there's not a lot of DC offset noise and stuff happening. There's like effectively none. So you can use the film cap. The film cap is no more or less effective than the electrolytic polarized cap would be in this application. The difference is that, one, a film cap of the size you need is big. It's a big honker. It's like the size of a chiclet, so it's much bigger than the little film caps you traditionally find, and it's bigger even than a comparable value electrolytic cap, which is a real little guy. But the advantage of using the film caps in that application is that over time, electrolytic caps leak and drift. They drift because they leak. And because of that, it is more robust from an engineering standpoint, both in terms of durability on the road and in inclement, all sorts of varying temperature and humidity conditions, and also from the standpoint of the audio signal, because you don't want drift in the values. It makes a lot more sense to use the film capacitor because it's a lot more stable in that application. It's more stable with temperature changes. It doesn't leak over time because there's nothing to leak out of it. So it's not going to drift, basically. After that, there is a 10K resistor running to ground, and then it runs out. I see no reason to change these values. I might monkey with them in the future, but right now, I don't think they're doing that much to the buffer sound, and I kind of like the way the buffer sounds. So I think other than, playing with the input resistor value, I'm probably not going to do too much to this circuit. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this crazy 30-minute, schizoid rant about buffers. They're not snake oil. They do real shit to your signal, and that has a perceptible impact on your tone, right? So here, my tone chain is not even, it's not complicated, right? I have a 10-foot input cable, which is the lowest capacitance cable on the market right now, running between the guitar and the breadboard. I run through a circuit which has, 8 inches of wiring in it. And then I'm running out to a 10-foot monster cable that's running into the audio interface. So I have about 20, 21 feet of cable in the signal, give or take. That's without any other pedals in it. That's without an effects loop. That's without any sort of, stage cabling, any of that shit. Even with just 20 feet of super low capacitance cable, you still hear it, right? And you can go back and listen to the unbypassed signal and then click forward to the timestamps and hear what the buffer is doing in comparison to when it is bypassed. I hear it, and I'm 39 years old. My ears are okay. I'm not a super engineer or anything like that. I spent, 4 years marching drum corps, 2 years in college marching band, and 4 years in high school marching band playing the drums, and a bunch of time, 25 years playing in rock bands. So I wouldn't say that my hearing over 12K is, better than anybody else. And I still hear a difference. I would love to hear what you think. If you are watching this video, I encourage you, breadboard one of these circuits. It's really easy. They're really cheap. You can take it from a breadboard to a strip of Vero board and box yourself up a buffer for, $10. So I encourage you to do it. I encourage you to, if you do it, socket your chip so that you can put different chips in and hear how they sound. Hell, socket the input resistors. See how different input resistors sound. This circuit is so easy to work on. It's really cool, and it has great results. So I hope to hear from you. I want to know what you think. I love you. Bye-bye.